an award for integrity and honesty, for work that essentially prevented a war. Thomas Fingar, now a professor at Stanford University, oversaw the National Intelligence Estimate on Iran in 2007, during a period when the Bush administration was beating the drums of war. Its conclusion, that all 16 US intelligence agencies judged with high confidence that Iran had given up its nuclear weapons program in 2003, placed an insurmountable obstacle on the path to conflict. Critics of the report's conclusions say it was politicised. But speaking to us in Oxford, where he's currently teaching as part of an overseas programme, Thomas Fingar argued that unlike the flawed WMD report on Iraq in 2002, his assessment has withstood scrutiny over the years.
The assessment of our estimate has been reviewed many times before we issued it, many times in the years since with additional information. And judging by the public statements, the annual threat testimony and other statements of administration, which must be consistent with the classified report, they haven't changed it. It stood up as good analytic tradecraft. That there are people who characterize it as if it was written in order to prevent war. That's not why it was written. It was written to describe the situation as best we understood it.
Every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence. As I show you these...
When asked what went wrong in 2002, Fingar says those authoring the NIE on Iraq caved into pressure to produce a rushed report.
Let's look at one.
It produced an estimate in 17 days. That was the congressionally imposed deadline agreed to by George Tenet. So they produced something in 17 days, which had 2 weekends in there. And it's a classic case of you want something real bad, you get something real bad. Stuff pulled off the shelf, not really reevaluated, no ability to go back and really tear into this stuff. And we were not going to make that mistake again with the Iran estimate.
But again,
so we took the heat by saying you don't get it until we're ready.
But he says that ultimately politicians can choose to ignore the intelligence agencies if they don't get the results they want.
The decision to go to war had clearly been made before that estimate was undertaken. Troops were moving, that you could not have been in Washington and not known there was going to be a war. For INR, that we said there's not evidence of a reconstituted nuclear program. That was the only one that really mattered. And we said, no, evidence isn't there. The evidences can all be explained in other ways. That's the third sentence of the estimate. So if you cared about this enough to read to the third sentence, you'd know that there was a dissent on the major justification for the conflict.
The Sam Adams Associates present their award each year for integrity in intelligence. Many previous awardees have been intelligence professionals and whistleblowers. 2010 Sam Adams awardee Julian Assange of WikiLeaks was piped into the ceremony by video link. He used the opportunity to tackle an upcoming Hollywood movie, which he says is an attack on WikiLeaks and renews the push for war with Iran.
We have something here which is a recent acquisition of WikiLeaks. The script to a tens of millions of dollar budget DreamWorks movie. What is it about? It is about us, nominally. It is about WikiLeaks, the organization. It is a mass propaganda attack against WikiLeaks, the organization, and the character of my staff and our activities and so on. But it is not just an attack against us. It fans the flames to start a war with Iran. And it's coming out in November. It's being filmed now. So that's the reality of where we're at. Not merely a war of intelligence agencies, but a war of corrupt media, corrupt culture.
Sam Adams himself was a CIA analyst in the Vietnam era, tasked with estimating enemy strength in numbers. His conclusion that the Viet Cong numbered at least 500,000, twice the official figure, was swept under the rug at the time, seen as politically unacceptable. He later did go public, but too late to have an impact on the war.
He went to an early death at age 55 with great remorse that he had not gone outside the system, that he had not said what he knew back in 1967, halfway through the war. The way he explained it to me is the Vietnam Memorial, made out of granite in a V, that whole left section wouldn't be there because there'd be no names to carve into that granite. If he had spoken out, if I had spoken out, if we had spoken out around 1967, when we had that cable from General Abrams saying we can't go with the honest figures because we've been projecting a view of progress.
And so just as interesting as this year's award winner are those presenting it to him. Former US Army Colonel Ann Wright resigned as a State Department official in protest over the Iraq War. She argues that too many within government are carried along with political tides, often at the expense of what's best for the nation.
There were so many people that were a part of the decision to go ahead and invade and occupy Iraq that knew better, that knew that the rationale for it was wrong, but they went along with the senior leadership of our country who, for whatever reason it was, whether it was for oil or for whatever it was, wanted to take out the Saddam Hussein regime.
Like other Sam Adams associates, she sees whistleblowers as an essential check to keep the system in balance.
So many whistleblowers find that the system doesn't want to hear what they have to say, because usually it's something that the government system is doing wrong, and whistleblowers are saying, wait, this is going wrong, or maybe there's even criminal acts that are happening that the government's involved in, and we've got to stop that and change it. And we find that many times the government and senior officials in the government don't want to hear that.
Previous Sam Adams Award winner Colleen Rowley blew the whistle after 9/11 on major intelligence sharing failures within the FBI in the run-up to the attacks. Her 9/11 Commission testimony helped reorganize the agency and the way information is shared.
They realized that 9/11 occurred because the agencies blocked information from each other. They blocked it vertically, horizontally, and they blocked it from the public. So the people who are in those environments, when information is blocked and there was lack of sharing, what is their choice? They almost have to either become a whistleblower or then live forever with the consequences of knowing that they could have done something. That's why WikiLeaks, or a method of sharing information, and of course I talked about sharing information between agencies, but it's also with the public. The 9/11 Commission said if the information even had been shared of Moussawi's arrest, that would have probably prevented 9/11. So it's an incredible situation that people don't realize. Most people think secrecy is protecting them, and it's the exact opposite.
Riley believes much more information should be made public, whether or not it's politically embarrassing.
We've had some good Inspector General investigations, for instance, of torture in the CIA. To this day, though, it remains secret. And you see the opposite is Abu Ghraib. That report was made public, and so at least the public learned about it, and there was, at the time, there was an outcry about the fact that it was discovered that abuses were occurring in Abu Ghraib. But the CIA torture report was still, I think it's probably a good investigation, but the public still doesn't know. And so what's happened? There's a movie out there that's using a false narrative. The public doesn't know that it's not even false. How would they know? Because they've never seen the truth. It's a pretty incredible situation. I mean, the truth really matters.
The US government says it's necessary to prosecute whistleblowers to protect national security. And for whistleblowers who do choose to go public, the consequences are increasingly dangerous.
Especially under Obama. There have been prosecutions, I think it's 7 now, twice as many as all presidents of all time under the official Espionage Act. If you go back to Deep Throat in the FBI, who knew that the highest level president's men were actually engaging in wrongdoing. Would that repeat today? I really wonder. I mean, especially now with the surveillance and the monitoring.
And I ended up reporting it.
Thomas Drake is the only whistleblower so far who's managed to fight espionage charges under Obama and win. There are 6 other cases. A former senior executive at the NSA, he blew the whistle to the media on a failed billion-dollar surveillance program, which he believed violated the Constitution.
I was eyewitness to massive fraud, waste, and abuse on a multi-billion-dollar program, a boondoggle program called Trailblazer, when there was actually a superior alternative and was also a program that would have completely honored the Fourth Amendment and the exclusive statute by which the U.S. government, NSA, was authorized to violate the Fourth Amendment rights of Americans. That was under FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. They willfully broke the law criminally. But in what happened later, as all this came out, and I ended up going to a reporter, they criminalized the reporting of the government wrongdoing. They criminalized the reporting of government criminal conduct.
Drake says he was careful not to reveal any classified information, and after reviewing laws on disclosure, thought that the worst that could happen is that he would lose his job. Instead, he faced espionage charges amounting to 35 years in prison.
I was turned into an enemy of the state. I mean, I'm charged with the Espionage Act. I'm being put into the same category as historical spies in U.S. history, the Alger Hisses, the Robert Hansons, the Aldrich Ames of the world. That's the category of people that you become associated with. So it's probably one of the worst things an American can be charged with, as under the Espionage Act, because you are painted into a very dark corner. You have betrayed your country. I was put under investigation by the Bush administration, but the Bush administration never actually indicted me. It took the Obama administration to actually indict me. And when they indicted me, they threw everything they had at me. In 2008, his presidential campaign, he actually lauded whistleblowers. He called them out. He called them out as patriots. Who better to call the government onto the carpet when they're up to no good? And yet he's presided over the most draconian crackdown on truth-tellers and whistleblowers of any administration, actually all administrations combined. I mean, it truly is unprecedented.
Despite immense pressure to plead out, Drake maintained his innocence, and on the eve of trial, government prosecutors dropped the charges. But Thomas Drake has been left blacklisted, financially bankrupt, and disturbed at the path his country is following.
I'm having great difficulty recognizing my own country in terms of the government, the form of government under which I took an oath to support and defend 4 times in my government career. And yet I was criminalized and was painted as an enemy of the state for simply speaking truth to power. And it was clear they were going to make me an object lesson, and they threw everything they had at me.
Of course, it's not just US administrations that face accusations of covering up fraud and criminal acts under the guise of national security. Annie Machon was an agent in the British spy agency MI5. She claims Britain is ahead of the US in terms of stifling whistleblowers from within the intelligence community.
They had a rethink about the Official Secrets Act and launched a new one in 1989, the 1989 Official Secrets Act, which obviated, got rid of the public interest defence. And the only reason that clause was put in was to stifle whistleblowing. There's already that old law to stop treachery. So this was designed to stifle whistleblowers. And it has been used many times in the UK since. I mean, against David Shayler, Richard Tomlinson, Catherine Gunn. And it has a very chilling effect on the idea that if you see crimes committed by the spy agencies, what do you do with that information? The only person you can go to legally under the OSA in 1989 is the head of the agency you wish to make a complaint against. So you can imagine how many of those complaints are upheld. And I think it's particularly pertinent at the moment, certainly in the last 10 years, where we've seen false information fed into the political process, where we've seen politicisation of intelligence in the run-up to the Iraq War, with the Downing Street memo and the head of MI6 saying the intelligence facts had to be fitted around the policy. And also where we see things like torture and extraordinary rendition, where our British spies are being used to do that, and they are protected under a lot of secrecy laws. And the government, in fact, wants to make greater protection for them by setting up secret courts, where the accused can't even see what they're accused of. It's Kafkaesque.
Allegations against British intelligence services of complicity in torture do still make it through to the media when the alleged victims speak out. But with tight laws around disclosure in the UK, it's impossible to say whether or not what we hear is just a fraction of what's taking place.
I worked in MI5 in the mid-1990s for 6 years. That, I would say, would be the only marginally ethical decade of its 100-year existence, because up to 1989 it did not officially exist, it could do whatever it wanted, and post 9/11 the gloves came off with the intelligence agencies. So in the 1990s peace was breaking out, they didn't get involved in torture, they stopped looking at political activists, the whole shebang. So that was actually the more ethical era, and yet in those 6 years David Shelley and I saw so much going wrong that we felt compelled to blow the whistle. So how much worse is it now? That has to be the question. I think all we are seeing now with extradition and torture cases is definitely very much the tip of the iceberg.
It's clear that the act of whistleblowing, even in the public interest, is under serious threat. Some may consider this a positive development in terms of national security. Others see it as the end of public accountability for those in positions of power.
I mean, if the government begins to exercise increasing influence, even if it's self-censorship, where people will not speak up because they're afraid that they're going to be noticed by the government, that means that critical information about government activities will never see the light of day. And especially the secret side of government, you would think that that's the part of the government you would want the most accountability with. Well, if they're choking off the sources and they're making it very clear, even though I was able to prevail and hold off the government and remained a free man, well, the message was still sent.
Hassan Ghani for The Real News, London.